Usually, water means danger, more unpredictable, more lethal, and far less forgiving than anything on land. But there was one time in Earth's history when the ocean became the safer bet, the late Permian, between 259 and 252 million years ago. On land, apex predators prowled Pangaea in record numbers, while the superocean Panthalassa, covering more than half the planet, had just lost its most terrifying hunters. With about 22-hour days and a sun that barely let up, being on land wasn't brave, it was reckless. For a brief, unlikely window, the only escape from countless jaws and claws was the water itself. How did the rules flip, and what turned the land into a gauntlet of risk when every law of nature says the sea should be worse? Let's unravel the only time in history that water was safer than land. In the late Permian, the world's oceans had just been through a disaster few could survive. Apex predators that once ruled the water, creatures like Helicoprion, famous for its bizarre spiral jaw, and the armored sea scorpions known as Eurypterids, were vanishing from the fossil record. The last known Helicoprion fossils appear in rocks from Russia and Australia dating to the Middle Capitanian, about 262 million years ago. After that, nothing. Their bite force, which could reach over 1,000 newtons, simply disappeared from the food web, leaving a gap that no other marine animal could fill for millions of years. Eurypterids, once the terror of shallow seas, faded out in the same interval. Their numbers dropped sharply, and by the late Permian, they were gone entirely. In their wake, only smaller, less formidable sharks and fish remained. Hybodont sharks, which had once grown up to 2 meters long, shrank in both size and diversity as the Lopingian progressed. Large ammonoids, too, lost ground. Their shells, sometimes measuring more than a meter across, became rare, replaced by much smaller survivors clinging to existence at the edge of extinction. This stepwise collapse is written into the rocks. At sites like Meishan in China, paleontologists have traced the vanishing of these predators layer by layer, each stratum a record of another guild lost. The fossil sequence shows a world where, over a span of 2 to 4 million years, the top hunters vanished one by one. By the time the Changsingian stage began, the ocean's most dangerous animals were gone, replaced by opportunists and scavengers. The deep basins of Panthalassa, the superocean that covered more than 60% of Earth's surface, were left with little more than shadows of their former inhabitants. The reasons for this collapse are buried in chemical clues. Spikes of mercury in the sediments point to massive volcanic eruptions, while isotopic shifts in carbon and oxygen mark sudden changes in climate and ocean chemistry. Anoxia, waters starved of oxygen, spread, especially in deeper regions, driving even the hardiest predators to extinction. Yet for a brief window, before the final catastrophe, the upper ocean remained relatively stable. The seas grew quiet, not because life was thriving, but because the most lethal creatures had disappeared. For any animal crossing these waters, the odds of encountering a killer dropped dramatically. Ecological models suggest that during this interval, a 1-meter-long swimmer would be 10 times less likely to meet a deadly predator than just a few million years before. The ocean, once a battleground, became a refuge, strange, empty, and eerily safe by comparison. On land, the story was entirely different, but in the water, the absence of giants was its own kind of protection. Life in the Permian Ocean, for the first time in eons, was defined by what was missing. The food web, once stacked with hunters that could bite through bone or armor, had been hollowed out. With the disappearance of apex predators like Helicoprion and the last of the giant sea scorpions, the open water turned strangely quiet. The biggest sharks left behind, mostly hybodonts, rarely reached more than a meter in length, about the size of a modern reef shark. Their teeth, adapted for soft prey, hint at a diet of squid and small fish, rather than pitched battles with armored ammonoids or rival hunters. Ecological models built from fossil counts and predator-prey ratios show a collapse in risk. For a mid-sized swimmer, the odds of a deadly encounter dropped by a factor of 10 compared to earlier epochs. In practical terms, a 1-meter animal crossing the Panthalastic shallows had almost the same chance of surviving as a person walking through a city at noon. Nearly no one was out to get you. The ocean's emptiness became its shield. The structure of the food web shifted. Energy flowed through smaller, more numerous creatures, shoals of ray-finned fish, clusters of soft-bodied cephalopods, and drifting plankton. Scavengers and opportunists, species that could pivot quickly to new diets, filled the gaps left by the vanished giants. The largest ammonoids, once over a meter across, had dwindled to palm-sized shells. Even the most successful survivors seemed to be playing it safe, sticking to the edges rather than risking bold moves. Chemical evidence from the rocks, spikes of mercury, shifts in carbon isotopes, record the environmental stress, but the fossils themselves tell a story of absence. In places like Meishan, the layers are packed with small, undisturbed shells and the delicate remains of filter feeders. There are no signs of mass predation or sudden die-offs. Instead, there's a gradual thinning, a hush settling over the ecosystem. For the rare vertebrate moving through these waters, the experience would have been uncanny. The usual cues of danger, shadows overhead, sudden rushes in the dark, were gone. Instead, the ocean stretched on, vast and oddly peaceful. In a time when the land was about to become the world's most dangerous neighborhood, the sea offered a strange kind of mercy. Safety, for once, meant drifting rather than running. The rules of survival had been rewritten, if only for a little while. Across the sun-baked plains of late Permian Pangaea, the rules of survival were enforced by jaws and teeth, none more terrifying than those of the Gorgonopsids. These were not reptiles nor true mammals, but belonged to a lineage known as Terrestrials, a group that would one day give rise to mammals. For now, though, they were the undisputed tyrants of the land. Inostrancevia, first unearthed in the Russian north by Vladimir Amalitsky in 1899, stood out as a colossus among killers. Stretching up to 3.5 meters long, nearly 12 feet, and weighing well over 300 kilograms, it was a predator built for domination. Its skull alone could reach 60 centimeters, longer than a human arm, and housed a set of saber-shaped canines up to 18 centimeters, about 7 inches, projecting downward like ivory daggers. What set Inostrancevia apart was not just size, but engineering. The skull was tall and narrow, with enormous openings, the temporal fenestrae, making room for jaw muscles thicker than a human thigh. These muscles anchored to reinforced bone, allowing the jaws to open to a staggering 90-degree angle, wide enough to engulf a soccer ball in a single bite. When the jaws snapped shut, the force was measured in thousands of newtons. Biomechanical models built from CT scans and digital reconstructions estimate bite forces between 2,000 and 4,000 newtons, enough to drive those canines deep into the flesh of an armored parasaur or a thick-skinned dicynodont. The teeth themselves were laterally flattened and deeply rooted, designed to withstand the stress of stabbing and slashing rather than crushing bone. The killing technique was simple: a sudden rush, a targeted bite to the throat or belly, and a quick withdrawal. Death came by blood loss or shock, not by dismemberment. Inostranczevia's reign was not limited to Russia. Recent discoveries in Tanzania show that these predators crossed continents following prey and opportunity wherever they arose. Their bones turn up in the same fossil beds as the African giants, the rubigines. If Inostrancevia was the saber tooth of the north, then Rubigia was the southern answer. Found chiefly in the Karoo Basin of South Africa, Rubidia and its kin were every bit as formidable. At up to 3 meters in length and 500 kilograms in mass, these animals were as heavy as a modern grizzly bear, but with a skull built for war. The head was broader and thicker than Inostrancevia's, with reinforced parietal bones that could absorb the thrashing of a wounded prey animal. Rubidia's canines were even longer, sometimes exceeding 20 centimeters or 8 inches, curved and serrated along the edges for maximum tissue damage. The mechanics of the kill were nearly identical: a rapid bite, delivered with jaws that could swing open to nearly a right angle, then a retreat to let blood loss do the work. Micro-wear studies on the teeth show parallel scratches and few pits, the classic signature of flesh slicing rather than bone crunching. Some Rubidia specimens bear more micro-abrasions, hinting at occasional contact with bone, perhaps when scavenging or stripping a carcass clean. The limb bones of both groups reveal a predator built for short, explosive bursts of speed. The legs were long and muscular, with elbows and knees set in a semi-sprawled posture, trading endurance for the ability to close the gap in a final decisive sprint. The fossil record in places like the Karoo tells a story of predator density almost unheard of in later ecosystems. Dr. Roger Smith, who spent decades excavating these beds, described them as a graveyard built by carnivores. In some layers, predator fossils outnumber herbivores, a reversal of the usual balance seen in modern savannas. This was not a land where prey could hide or hope for safety in numbers. Instead, it was a world where every step was a gamble, and the saber-toothed Gorgonopsids held all the cards. Even among these apex killers, there was competition. Inostrancevia and Rubidia sometimes overlapped in time and space, their fossils found within meters of each other. Some paleontologists suspect they partitioned the landscape by prey size or hunting style, much like modern lions and hyenas. Others argue that direct competition was inevitable, driving both to extremes of size and weaponry. What is certain is that for a brief window in Earth's history, the land was ruled by saber tyrants. Their reign was absolute, their methods efficient, and for anything living above ground, every day was a test of luck against jaws engineered for extinction. Not every killer in the late Permian was a saber-toothed giant. The land seethed with predators of every shape and hunting style, each one adding a new hazard to the gauntlet. Therocephalians, for example, were smaller than the Gorgonopsids, but just as relentless. These sleek, low-slung hunters rarely stretched beyond a meter in length, yet their skulls were packed with sharp, recurved teeth and powerful jaw muscles. Some, like Eucambertia from South Africa, carried a secret weapon, an anatomical puzzle that still intrigues paleontologists. High-resolution CT scans of its skull reveal a deep groove running beneath the eye, leading from a large fossa above the canine tooth. The arrangement is so unusual that some researchers believe it may have housed a venom gland, making Eucambertia the earliest plausible venomous land predator. The groove itself is wide and well-defined, and the canine is grooved as well, an arrangement reminiscent of modern venomous snakes and lizards, where toxins travel along these channels to deliver a chemical punch with every bite. Yet the evidence is tantalizing rather than conclusive. The same groove might have carried nerves or supplied a scent gland. The debate continues, but there is no question that even the smallest predators on Permian land could be uniquely dangerous. Therocephalians were not alone in their tactics. Along the riverbanks and in the shrinking waterholes, Proterosuchids waited in silence. These early archosaur relatives, with their elongated jaws and low-slung bodies, looked like prototypes for the crocodiles that would dominate later ages. They were ambush specialists, lurking among reeds or submerged in muddy water, ready to lunge at anything that strayed too close. Fossil trackways from the Russian and South African basins show sudden, deep impressions, evidence of explosive launches from cover. When the rains failed and water became scarce, the last pools turned into death traps, patrolled by both reptiles and the largest amphibians the world had yet seen. The temnospondyls, ancestors of modern salamanders, could reach 4 meters in length, longer than most family cars. With broad, flat heads and jaws lined with needle-sharp teeth, they were the nightmare at the bottom of every pond. Some, like Prionosuchus, had skulls nearly a meter long and likely hunted anything that dared to drink. Fossilized remains sometimes show the bones of small therapsids or juvenile parasaurs inside their rib cages, a testament to their role as aquatic ambushers. Even the margins of safety, rivers, lakes, muddy banks, offered little respite. The land was not just a kingdom of saber-tooths, but a layered threat, with each predator exploiting a different niche. Predator density reached levels rarely seen in any other era. In some fossil beds, therocephalian skulls outnumber those of their prey, a reversal of the usual pyramid. This predator-rich ecosystem forced herbivores into desperate strategies, burrowing deep underground or growing thick armor just to survive a little longer. Some paleontologists, like Dr. Roger Smith, have described these fossil sites as carnivore factories, where every new generation of hunters faced a world already crowded with competition. The result was a landscape where danger came from every direction, from above, from below, from the water's edge, and even from the shadows of your own kind. Venom, ambush, numbers, each new adaptation raised the stakes for survival. The CT groove in Eucambertia's skull stands as a symbol of this arms race, a possible glimpse of chemical warfare at the dawn of terrestrial ecosystems. Whether or not it truly delivered venom, the message was clear. On Permian land, the rules of safety had been rewritten. Every step, every drink, every breath was a gamble, and the only certainty was that the next threat would be stranger, sharper, or more patient than the last. In a world where every shadow concealed a predator and the surface baked under a relentless sun, survival for most herbivores was a matter of minutes, not years. Yet one animal, Lystrosaurus, found a solution that sidestepped the jaws and claws waiting above ground. Instead of running or fighting, it vanished beneath the earth. Fossilized burrows scattered across what is now South Africa and Antarctica trace the outlines of this underground life. Tunnels wide enough for a pig-sized body, spiraling or sloping down to a snug oval chamber. Some stretch nearly 2 meters, with diameters around 30 centimeters, just right for a Lystrosaurus to wedge itself in, nose to tail. The body that built these tunnels was a marvel of digging machinery. Lystrosaurus had forelimbs so stout and broad that paleontologists have compared them to the arms of modern wombats. The shoulder girdle was reinforced, the humerus thick and curved, the hands short and tipped with sturdy claws. Its skull, low and wedge-shaped, worked like a living shovel. 2 ever-growing tusks jutted forward, showing wear patterns that suggest they were used as chisels, scraping through hard-packed dirt and gravel. Even the bones of the forelimb showed dense, compact structure, an adaptation for pushing, not sprinting. Inside these burrows, the world was different. Modern analogs suggest that underground, temperatures could be as much as 10 degrees Celsius cooler than the scorched surface above. In a landscape where the air regularly topped 35 degrees Celsius, that difference spelled the line between life and heat stroke. Humidity in the tunnels ran higher, slowing the loss of water from panting or sweating. The soil itself muffled noise and vibration, offering a cloak of silence against the constant thumping of carnivore footsteps. For Lystrosaurus, a burrow was more than a hiding place. It was a climate refuge, a nursery, a last redoubt against extinction. Burrow casts sometimes contain the bones of more than one animal, hinting at possible family groups or at least shared shelter during the worst droughts. The sediment filling these tunnels is often fine-grained and undisturbed, a sign that the chambers stayed intact for long periods, perhaps used season after season. The deeper the tunnel, the safer the occupant. Every meter of soil between Lystrosaurus and the outside world was a shield, not just from predators, but from the deadly swings of heat and dryness that ruled the late Permian landscape. While the saber-toothed giants prowled above, the real survivors were learning to disappear. Standing on the open floodplains of late Permian Russia, a different answer to survival lumbered through the dust. Scutosaurus, whose name means shield lizard, was a living fortress, an herbivore that had traded speed and stealth for pure, unyielding defense. At full size, it could top 1.2 metric tons, heavier than a modern bison, with a barrel-shaped body and limbs as thick as fence posts. But the real secret to its survival lay just under the skin, a mosaic of bony plates called osteoderms layered across its neck, back, and flanks. Each plate was a product of years, even decades, of slow growth. Histological slices taken from fossilized armor reveal tight bands of bone, some up to 25 millimeters thick, about the width of a man's thumb. These bands record the cycles of feast and famine, wet and dry, that marked every Permian year. Growth was slow, energy intensive, and relentless. Every millimeter of bone demanded a steady intake of calcium and protein, a risky investment in a world where plants were withering under the heat. Yet the payoff was clear, a living wall that no saber-tooth could easily breach. When threatened, Scutosaurus didn't run. It squared up, hunkered down, and presented a shield of bone and horn to the attacker. The skull itself was a helmet studded with bosses and ridges, and the body's wide stance made toppling this animal nearly impossible. Some paleontologists believe Scutosaurus could even use its bulk as a display, standing broadside to intimidate or deflect an incoming predator. The cost of all this armor was steep: slow movement, a low metabolic rate, and a constant battle to find enough food. But in an ecosystem where most herbivores lasted only as long as it took a predator to find them, Scutosaurus endured by turning itself into a problem no hunter wanted to solve quickly. The plates themselves tell a story of endurance. Under the microscope, their dense avascular structure suggests that healing was slow, but damage was rare. Scars and gouges on fossil specimens hint at failed attacks, teeth marks that never reached the vital organs beneath. In the Permian gauntlet, armor was not just a physical barrier, but a strategy. Absorb the first blow, outlast the attacker, and live to graze another day. For Scutosaurus, survival was measured in centimeters of bone, each one a record of battles survived and seasons weathered. In the waning years of the Permian, the world's surface was about to be transformed by forces far greater than any predator. In northern Pangaea, a rift in the crust split open, and what followed was one of the most violent volcanic episodes in Earth's history, the eruption of the Siberian Traps. For nearly 1 million years, basalt poured from fissures and vents, not as a single explosion, but as a relentless flood. The volume is almost incomprehensible, more than 2 million cubic kilometers of lava, enough to bury the entire United States under nearly a kilometer, over half a mile, of molten rock. This was not a localized disaster. The eruptions blanketed vast tracts of land, reshaping continents and filling the sky with ash and smoke. But the lava was only the beginning. As molten rock forced its way through ancient coal seams and mineral beds, it released a torrent of gases, carbon dioxide, methane, and sulfur compounds, into the atmosphere. Some estimates suggest that atmospheric carbon dioxide may have doubled or even tripled, driving a greenhouse effect that pushed global temperatures to new extremes. The air thickened with aerosols, while sunlight dimmed under a haze of volcanic dust. Rain turned acidic, stripping leaves from trees and poisoning rivers. Forests in Siberia, China, and beyond were incinerated almost overnight, leaving behind charcoal layers in the rocks, a silent record of a world set ablaze. Each pulse of eruption brought a fresh wave of devastation. The chemical chain reaction set off by these gases would soon reach every corner of the planet. Oceans began to absorb the excess carbon, their chemistry shifting in ways that would prove lethal for most marine life. On land, every living thing faced a new and unfamiliar enemy, the sky itself. The scale of this catastrophe is written into the rocks, not just in layers of basalt, but in the sudden disappearance of entire ecosystems. For millions of years, life had adapted to drought, to predators, to heat. Nothing alive was prepared for the world to catch fire from within. The Siberian traps did not erupt all at once. Instead, the land heaved and split in fits and starts, each episode sending out new floods of lava and clouds of gas. With every eruption, the balance of the atmosphere shifted further from what life could tolerate. The final act of this volcanic onslaught would push Earth's systems past the point of recovery, setting off a chain of events that no animal, plant, or ocean could escape. The illusion of safety in the ocean didn't last. As the Siberian traps continued to erupt, the chemistry of Panthalassa and the surrounding seas began to unravel in ways no animal could anticipate. Carbon dioxide from the volcanic plumes poured into the atmosphere and dissolved into seawater, pushing the ocean's pH lower with every passing millennium. Boron isotope records from fossil shells show a sharp drop in pH, what scientists call ocean acidification, turning the water corrosive to anything with a shell or skeleton. For creatures that had survived the earlier predator collapse, this new threat was both invisible and inescapable. Oxygen, too, became a memory. As the seas warmed, their ability to hold dissolved oxygen plummeted. The deep basins of Panthalassa, already starved for air, grew into vast oxygen deserts. Pyrite grains in the rocks, tiny framboidal clusters, are the calling card of anoxia, and they appear in layer after layer across sites in South China, Australia, and Russia. In some places, the entire water column went hypoxic. From the muddy bottom all the way to the surface, animals gasped for breath that was no longer there. The once quiet refuge turned into a trap, suffocating its inhabitants in slow motion. Fossil counts from the Meishan section in China and the Perth Basin in Australia tell the same story: a sudden catastrophic drop in diversity. Whole groups vanished in what amounts to a geological instant. Ammonoids, conodonts, and brachiopods, already reduced to a handful of species, disappeared entirely. Coral reefs crumbled as acid ate away at their skeletons. By the end of this chemical onslaught, nearly 80% of all marine species were gone. The scale of the loss is difficult to grasp. It was more than the sum of predators or prey. It was the erasure of entire ways of living, the end of lineages that had survived for hundreds of millions of years. The ocean, once the last sanctuary, became a graveyard. Water that had offered mercy now delivered extinction. For a brief moment in Earth's history, the rules of survival had flipped, but the reversal could not hold. When the chemistry turned, there was nowhere left to hide. Life in the sea was swept away by forces as relentless and indifferent as the lava that had set the crisis in motion. The refuge was erased, and the world entered an age of silence. At the height of the late Permian, Panthalassa made up over 60% of Earth's surface, while land was ruled by predators like Inostrancevia, and Rubidgea, each stretching over 3 meters. Fossil records confirm that after the Capetanian extinction, The world's oceans lost their largest hunters, dropping encounter risk by a factor of 10. On land, life expectancy for prey animals rarely exceeded 12 years, often half a lifetime, due to constant threat. Yet, despite detailed skeletons and burrow traces, many aspects of these creatures' behavior remain uncertain. The precise triggers behind the Siberian trap's eruptions and the speed of the resulting extinction are still debated in peer-reviewed studies. Today, Earth's ecosystems are shaped by similar patterns of collapse and recovery. The late Permian shows that context, not inherent danger, decides where safety lies. For a brief window in history, survival meant leaving the land behind, because everything above water was trying to kill you.